Came across a post by a Syrian acquaintance that I have, and the post was basically showing a poster or a photo edited poster, I should say, on the London Underground, with the BBC logo, that is the red background and the white letters, um, stating, "We cover up Israel's crimes." Now, I say photo edited, it doesn't look like it's authentic. Like, I don't think it was a protest poster or something because of the editing, it just looked photoshopped. But either way, it's a claim that needs to be challenged. Um, I'm going to say it right now. I'm going to defend the BBC. I think that since this conflict began in 2023, this phase of the conflict, as we know, it's been going on for decades. This particularly brutal, devastating phase of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The BBC has been hammered by both sides. You have the pro-Israel lobby, people who are convinced that the BBC is biased against Israel, people who are convinced it has a pro-Palestinian agenda, and they criticize it for that. And then the other side, Palestinian campaign groups and others condemn the BBC for what they see as pro-Israel bias. So the BBC is literally attacked by both sides. Now, to me, that indicates it's potentially doing something right because most sources have a clear agenda. Most sources have a clear angle of pushing, particularly in such a divisive conflict as this, one way or the other. As an example, I would argue the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail um, and other right-wing publications have clearly got a pro-Israel agenda. I mean, they have scant reference to the civilian suffering. When they report it, it's just fleeting, and their editorials entirely pro-Israel. I absolutely would not trust the Daily Telegraph in its coverage of this conflict. It's got journalistic merit in other areas, but when it comes to Israel and Gaza, their pro-Israel bias is just, I think it discredits the journalism on this. At the start of this war, when Hamas attacked Israel in 2023, BBC was heavily condemned for refusing to use the terminology of terrorists regarding Hamas. And at the time, I thought that was a mistake. I still do, because they had no problem referring to terrorism in other contexts when it dealt with ISIS and far right extremism. Um, I still think it was a mistake. I still think it gave the perception that the BBC was reluctant to call Hamas what, by most definitions, it is. Um, to be a little bit more, I guess, nuanced in looking at that, it probably would have made it harder for their journalists on the ground to get interviews and to get access to the region if they just outright said Hamas is a terrorist organization. It would have made it harder for the BBC to report from within Gaza, which of course is controlled by Hamas. So that's an important thing to consider. I still think it was a mistake. I still think it sent out the wrong perception. But you know, when I see people claim that the BBC is pro-Israel, that is just ridiculous. It's quite clearly ridiculous. I'm going to read out some headlines. This is just in the last week. This is a headline from the BBC regarding this conflict. Lamy appalled and sickened by civilian suffering in Gaza. I can't hold on any longer. Gazans tell BBC of extreme hunger as UN condemns Israel-backed aid system. Dozens killed by Israeli gunfire near aid sites in South Gaza, Hamas-run ministry says. Jeremy Bowen. Israel's allies see evidence of war crimes in Gaza mounting up. So there you have four reports that very clearly are not censoring what Israel is doing. Very clearly, they're taking a critical angle of Israel, or at least reporting those who are critical of Israel. The Foreign Secretary wasn't holding back. He says, he told the BBC, as Foreign Secretary, I'm trying to be diplomatic, but I simply cannot not condemn what's happening. This government has got many things wrong, but I think the fact they have taken a more hardline approach with Israel is welcome. Some would say there's a contradiction there because they also prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist group. I think that was probably overreach. Although I do think that, for example, the three women that drove a vehicle into a military defense site, that's stupid. What do they expect? Those sort of actions are not peaceful, and sabotaging planes can put the pilots' lives at risk. So I don't think that's, it isn't harmless. But regarding the BBC, I trust the BBC more than other sources. It's not perfect, and more broadly speaking, there's plenty of grounds to criticise the BBC. I think the treatment of the Hugh Edwards scandal, the fact that he couldn't have his pay frozen after what was revealed, things like that, do the BBC no favours. I think their political correctness over the years has been at times pathetic. Um, but the BBC is kind of a whipping boy for everyone. And when we think of some of the alternatives, I look at GB News, which is exactly what claimed it wouldn't be. They said they wouldn't be a shouty British version of Fox News. That's kind of what they are. They clearly have a right wing agenda. They occasionally have a token left winger, but um, GB News will cover certain things around the culture wars that arguably are important, but I think they're really the mouthpiece of the Reform Party. Um, so no one could say, no one could look at GB News and say it's fair and balanced. It's clearly not. It clearly has an agenda. Um, I've seen the Daily Telegraph criticise the BBC over Gaza. I find that astonishing. I find that utterly astonishing. When the Daily Telegraph, the bias it has shown toward Israel is unbelievable. They will have a tiny little segment on 100 civilians killed in Gaza yesterday, and then a big section on BBC bias against Israel. It's pathetic. So, the BBC is not going to please everyone. It's not going to get everything right. And I'm not suggesting that their coverage has been perfect, but I do believe that their coverage has been better than many. Um, and I just find it ironic that those who are angry about what Israel's doing, a lot of the sources they're getting information from are from the BBC. It's ironic they're attacking the BBC for pro-Israel bias, yet they're getting their information from the BBC in many cases. So I really, this isn't about me sort of having this great desire to defend a powerful corporation. It's about basic truth. I think it is false to claim that the BBC is pro-Israel when it is clearly reporting some of the awful things Israel's doing. The Foreign Secretary pointed out that 83% of the Israeli public are now critical of Netanyahu's actions. So actually, you have a very small minority. Netanyahu, the hawks in his cabinet, some Israelis, some in the West who support Israel. That is it. Israel's actions have completely polarized it. Many Israelis are against Israel's actions. Um, and what is happening in Gaza is an abomination. I'm also disgusted by the fact that Palestinian civilians are being killed en masse. I mean, it's mass killing, it's collective punishment. And then you get people coming out with, I saw one guy actually say, this is emotional propaganda. What about the hostages? Well, I have enormous sympathy for the hostages, but you're weighing up what now is less than 100 people um, against the lives of hundreds, thousands of Palestinians. So there is an inherent bigotry of this mentality which suggests that Palestinian life is somehow worth less than an Israeli life. I condemn Hamas for what they done to the hostages. I think it was an incredibly stupid thing to do. It was also an immoral thing to do because they're civilians. They've been held in appalling conditions. Um, but I do not accept this mentality that the lives of the hostages are worth more than the Palestinians. And I also don't accept that if all the hostages were freed tomorrow, this would just end. Hawks and Netanyahu's cabinet have made it absolutely clear this is going well beyond self-defense. They've made it clear that they want to just completely destroy Gaza, then ultimately turn it into real estate for Israeli settlers. That is their extreme agenda, and it needs to be called out. The British government could go further. Those tough words need to be matched with an absolute halt on all support to Israel. Because the Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister are talking tough, but they need to match that with action. Condemning Israel isn't enough. They need to match it with action. But honestly, Pro-Israelis condemn the BBC for supposedly being pro-Palestinian, even though the BBC has been at pains to stress that Hamas attacked Israel. They've been at pains to talk about the hostages. They've, gone out of their way to point out the fact that the information from Gaza is controlled often by Hamas. But they have also, reported on the civilian suffering. They've reported on airstrikes by Israel that have killed civilians. They've reported on the violence in the West Bank. As far as I'm concerned, the BBC has done their level best. I trust them more than other sources. I trust them more than the Daily Telegraph. I trust them more than GB News. I trust them more than Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera reports on the Palestinian suffering, and that's valid because there is a lot of Palestinian suffering. But the truth is, Al Jazeera does have an inherent bias against Israel before this conflict. Al Jazeera was never interested in reporting it in any sort of balanced way whatsoever. Al Jazeera is banned from reporting by Israel. But really, when you look across the board, the BBC's coverage of this has been better than most. It is not going to please everyone. There will be people out there who are convinced that the BBC is pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. I honestly think they have tried their absolute best to be as balanced as possible. And the fact that they've got roughly equal number of complaints proves that in reporting the way they are reporting, they are contradicting this claim that they're biased, actually. Because if they were biased, you would only see complaints from one side. That's not the case. So I will say I think the BBC has done the level best. It's not perfect, but it's better than many. So yeah, in defence of the BBC, I think they have done the level best. And if you're going to come out and say the BBC has censored Israel's crimes, how do you square that up against what I have literally just said? And I can put a link to those articles to prove that claim wrong. The BBC has reported on what Israel has done. So for pro-Palestinians who are claiming it hasn't, you're just being disingenuous.